Welcome back to the Nowhere Emporium. We're up to chapter 14, which is called Truce. I think I'm going to get two chapters read today, which should be good for us. Okie doke. So, since his run-in with the mugger in Paris, Mr. Silver had not been the same. Aside from putting a stop to any lessons, which Daniel missed greatly, Silver treated him well enough. Still, there was no denying that something was not right. His limp was showing no signs of improvement, and his general health seemed to be worsening each day. He looked older somehow, tired and fragile, and at times he would simply sit staring into space while cups of tea grew cold and customers came and went. His production of new wonders had slowed to a halt. Daniel was worried about him and about the Emporium. Silver moved the shop around a lot over the next few weeks, visiting Berlin in 1930s as Hitler was riding the crest of a dark wave, London during the coronation of Queen Victoria, and finally the streets of Barcelona, just months after the end of the Spanish Civil War. In each of these places and times, Silver would scour the back streets for magical shops, searching for his elusive treasure, but he would always return empty-handed and angry. One morning in Barcelona, Daniel set out to fetch coal for the fire. Upon his return to the shop, he began to tidy in preparation for twilight. He listened to the ticking of clocks as he worked, humming tunes and tapping on the tables of books. You should be on stage with a voice like that. Daniel, who had been polishing the eagle feet of Mr. Silver's desk, sprang up, catching the edge of the table with a thud. Ellie stood by the velvet curtain, arms folded. Daniel had not seen her since Paris. He knew that she didn't like him, and why should he like her? She seemed pig-headed and infuriating. But he found her fascinating. "Where have you been?" he said. Ellie shrugged. "Around." "I've been watching out for you," said Daniel. I've been wanting to say something. Sorry." Ellie tilted her head a little. "Sorry?" "Aye," said Daniel. "I mean, I can understand if you hate me. Some wee boy from Glasgow, coming in here and getting a job, working with your dad, but Ellie, I don't really have a clue what I'm doing. I'm sorry I didn't know about you, about how you're stuck in here. I'm just..." "Sorry?" said Ellie. Daniel nodded. "Daniel Holmes," she said, unfolding her arms. "However it might seem sometimes, I promise you that none of this, none of my storming off and throwing strops and getting angry, is really about you. Well, not much of it anyway." "It's not?" "No. Look, Papa and me, we don't have a smooth relationship. I love him to bits, I really do, but I get so angry with him sometimes. It's always like I'm the least important thing on his list, even if I know that's not really true. And you, well, you were just another distraction." "I don't mean to be," said Daniel. "I didn't ask to come here." "I know," said Ellie. "I know. That's the point, I guess. Neither of us asked to come, but here we are." "Is it really true you can't leave?" said Daniel. Ellie ran her fingers over the point of her chin. "Yeah." "And the customers can't see you?" "Nope." "Is it like a magical disease or something?" Ellie laughed. "It's complicated." "Well, I can see you," said Daniel. "You've got someone else to talk to. I mean, if you want." Ellie stared at him, the corners of her mouth forming the tiniest smile. "You want to see something cool?" Twilight came and went, and the Emporium opened its gates to the public. "What are we doing?" whispered Daniel. They had followed a customer, a man in a flat cap, through the Emporium, keeping out of sight, watching him enter several wonders. Along the way they passed Caleb and Anya, who tagged along, quite delighted to be a part of whatever was going on. "You'll see," said Ellie. They reached a quiet passageway where the customer in question entered another wonder. "This'll do," said Ellie. To Daniel she said, "You stay." Then to Caleb and Anya, "You know what to do." Daniel ducked behind a coat of armour just as the man reappeared. He watched Ellie walk towards him. She's going to bang into him, Daniel thought. But Ellie did not bump into him. She walked straight through him, like she was made of mist. The customer shivered, rubbed his hands together. He glanced around the dim corridor. Is someone there?" he said in a quiet voice. Nobody answered. Ellie ran a little way down the corridor to where another suit of armour was standing, and she began to push the armour along the ground towards the customer. When he heard the shrieking, scraping noise of the armour on the floor, the man jumped and turned just in time to see the suit of armour emerging from the shadows. He screamed, twisted round, and ran straight into Anya, who stood tall, every inch of her covered in undulating, glistening snakes. The man shrieked and spun again, just as Caleb lit his torch and blew hard on the flame, making the tongues lick and curl into the shape of a monster. In his panic, the man ran into a wall and then went sprinting away back towards a hall of stairways. Ellie was laughing so hard she was bent double. "Ha! Did you see his face?" said Caleb, tears of laughter streaming down his cheeks. He mimicked the poor customer. "That was one of the best in ages." The laughter was catching, and Daniel soon was slumped on the floor beside the other three. "This is how you pass the time?" he said. "Isn't it a wee bit mean?" "Oh, I don't do it often," she said, "but it usually works if I need cheering up." She wiped her eyes. "Customers don't remember anything after they leave the shop, do they? So it's perfectly harmless to scare them half to death." Her brain seemed to switch gears. "Hey, we're having a ball for my birthday soon. You'll be invited." Daniel, who had never been invited to a party in his life, opened his mouth to accept, but Ellie was talking again. "Papa throws the best balls for my birthday. I think it's his way of making up for the fact he's completely obsessed with the Emporium for the rest of the year. All the staff will be there." She nodded to Caleb and Anya. "Won't you?" "Of course," said Caleb. "Have we ever missed a ball?" He clapped his hands together. "Oh, I love mixing with people from the real world." He stopped short, remembering that Ellie would be nothing but a ghost to many of her own birthday guests. "Don't worry," she said. "It's nice to have so many people there just for me. They can't see me, of course, but I enjoy watching them, listening to how they talk, hearing their stories from out there." "Where has everyone gone today?" said Daniel. They had been walking back through the Emporium as they talked. There were no signs of customers or staff. The place had fallen silent. "It's too early for closing time." "Something's up," said Ellie. They said goodbye to Caleb and Anya and rushed down a staircase after staircase, seeing no one until they were on the ground floor, through the red curtain to the shop front. The closed sign had been hung on the door. Mr. Silver, limping and wheezing, was busying himself at the strange instrument on the wall. He was twisting dials as if his life depended on it, an expression of panic on his handsome face. Ellie leaned close to Daniel and whispered, "He's lost his marbles. It's finally happened." Daniel squinted at Mr. Silver, who was now tossing handfuls of coal haphazardly at the fire. "We're leaving?" "Very perceptive of you." "Why so sudden? What's happened?" "I've decided I don't like Barcelona." Daniel glanced at Ellie, who gave him her best. "I told you so, look." The fire roared, the flames turned red. I'm supposed to be your assistant," he said. "If something's wrong, maybe I can help." Silver stopped. He turned and fixed Daniel with wild grey eyes. "Nobody can help." Daniel didn't get the chance to ask another question. The fire exploded in a cloud of soot. By the time the dust had settled, Mr. Silver had disappeared through the curtain. Chapter 15. Bazaar's Bazaar. The Nowhere Emporium arrived in New York on the 30th of October 1929. "It has a magic all of its own, this city," said Mr. Silver, staring through the sepia-tinted windows from behind his desk. "The buildings, skyscrapers they call them, are growing taller by the day, it seems. It's as if they are racing to touch the sky. There is no place like it." Daniel turned from the impressive view and watched Mr. Silver, who was half hidden behind a pile of black envelopes, scribbling on small black cards. A silver magpie sat on each shoulder. "What are those for?" asked Daniel, scrubbing a layer of soot from the mirrors and clocks. "Invitations," said Silver. He did not elaborate. "It's for my birthday ball," Ellie told him later. "It's tomorrow." Daniel and Ellie had begun to meet most days before the Emporium opened to the public. Ellie, for all of her fierce bravado, was also caring and loyal, and Daniel had seen flashes of the person she hid behind her armour. It was also useful to be in Ellie's company. He was still banned from writing in the book, and Mr. Silver seemed too distracted to teach him much. Ellie was the next best thing, a guide who knew every corner of the Emporium. Daniel supposed that loneliness was binding them together. He was an orphan after all, and Ellie was motherless and always chasing the attention of her father. So here they were, two lonely children sharing in the biggest, most incredible secret there ever was. A smile spread across Ellie's face. "When Papa's finished the invitations, you can help me send them out. It'll be fun." "Fine," said Daniel, unable to fathom why anyone would get so excited about posting some letters. His mind turned to Mr. Silver. "Ellie, have you noticed anything strange about your dad recently?" "He's always strange," said Ellie. Yeah, I mean a different sort of strange, not in a good way. He spends most of his time alone, either locked up in his apartments or out looking for some secret object. I think he might be ill. He's been limping and coughing and all sorts." Ellie considered this for about 4 seconds. "I'm sure he's fine," she said with a shrug. Daniel left it at that, knowing that Ellie was too excited about her birthday ball to think about anything else. That evening twilight came and went, but Mr. Silver did not open the Emporium. "Is something wrong?" asked Daniel. "Are we having a night off?" Silver looked hollowed and worn. He did not answer, but slipped on his coat. "Going out?" said Daniel. Silver gave a nod. "Come, if you like." Eager to explore Manhattan, Daniel was across the room in a few bounds, pulling on his coat and gloves and scarf. Together they set off into the night. As it turned out, sightseeing was not on the agenda. It soon became clear that Mr. Silver was on the hunt again for his elusive treasure. He limped a couple of steps ahead of Daniel, barely speaking, as they charged along streets carved like canyons through the enormous buildings. Central Park, among all the suffocating concrete and glass fog, it seemed like the last green place on earth. Mr. Silver pointed out the famous Plaza Hotel, an enormous building that looked like a grand castle. 8 blocks later they swung into an alley where the steam from restaurant kitchens glowed in the light of the moon. They walked until they reached a plain brown door. At first glance it seemed to be the back entrance to a store or a cafe or a hotel. But then Daniel spotted something. 2 words carved into the doorframe above the door. The sort of thing that would only be noticed by those searching for it. Bazaar's Bazaar. Silver leaned in and opened the door. The shop beyond was a dark and dingy cave, half lit by the soft flickering glow of hundreds of dribbling candles. The air was soup thick. Mr. Silver had packed to the Nowhere Emporium with many trinkets and objects picked up in his travels. Props, he called them, that would never be sold, but created the illusion of a regular store. You could spend hours looking and always spot something you'd never seen. But Bazaar's Bazaar must have contained 100 times the amount of treasures. Coats of armour glistened, swords and shields hung on great racks. There were jars of pickled animals, powders, lotions, potions, cages containing ravens and snakes and spiders the size of Daniel's fist. At the far end of the store stood a counter, and behind the counter sat a middle-aged man with greasy, receding hair and a long, waxy face. His eyes seemed too large for his head, and one of them pointed inwards, while the other fixed on his customers. "You are looking for something in particular?" he said, in a voice rough as dead tree bark. "As a matter of fact," said Mr. Silver. He leaned in and whispered something in the man's ear. At first the shopkeeper did not respond. He sat back in his chair and reached under his desk, and when he brought his hand back out, it held a large onion. He raised the onion to his mouth and took a bite, skin and all, as if it were a juicy apple. "You're in luck, friend," the shopkeeper said, onion juice still dripping from his yellow teeth. Silver took a sharp intake of breath. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened his eyes, there was a spark in them that Daniel had never seen before. "Show me." The shopkeeper's yellowing eyes lingered on Silver's dusty old suit. "You realize," he said, "that the item in question will not be cheap." "Show me!" roared Silver, and he brought his fist down on the counter with such force that Daniel actually jumped. The shopkeeper nodded and cowered and turned away, disappearing down a set of stairs somewhere behind the desk. There was much banging and clattering from an unseen room, and after several minutes he reappeared, carrying a thin wooden box decorated with intricate carvings. Mr. Silver took it in his hands and turned his back to both Daniel and the shopkeeper. A pause. Daniel heard the box snap shut and Silver spun around. His face was blank, but there was a light dancing somewhere deep in his eyes. "I'll take it," he said, and he reached into his coat and pulled out a huge wad of $100 bills, held together with a golden clip. He tossed the money onto the desk. It was more money than Daniel had ever seen or imagined, and he watched the shopkeeper's eyes widen and his face become a mask of avarice and hunger. He dropped his raw onion to the floor and wiped the drool from the corners of his mouth, scooping up the money and cradling it in his hands like a baby. "Do we have a deal or don't we?" Silver asked impatiently. "Oh, yes," said the shopkeeper, and he held out a long hand that was both the colour and texture of blue-veined cheese. "We have a deal, all right. We have a deal."